From tropical cyclones, floods and wildfires in the United States and Europe to extreme droughts across parts of Middle East and Africa, it is now clear that the world is witnessing an unprecedented change in climate. It is time to act and act now. But where does Africa stand at this stage? Will world leaders gathering in Glasgow, Scotland for the UN Conference of Parties on Climate Change come up with a clear plan that will save the planet and Africa in particular? Today we have a panel of distinguished leaders and experts who are going to help us answer these questions and more. Welcome to CNBC Africa Special. My name is Julius Bismungo. Today on the panel we have Juliet Kabera, the Director General at Rwanda Environment Management Authority, a government institution in charge of protection of environment and sustainable management of natural resources. We also have Christopher Mbanefo, an entrepreneur, founder and CEO of OXY-ZEN. Christopher has been building some of radical approaches and business models for carbon markets. We also have Samuel Alemayehu, who's the Global Managing Director at Cambridge Industries Limited. They have built what is now considered Africa's fast-known major waste-to-energy plant in Ethiopia. Welcome, gentlemen. Let's dive into our conversation. And I'll start with you, Juliet. What is the magnitude of climate change right now here in Africa?
Yeah, thank you so much, Julius, and thanks to the SNBC for hosting me. I'm very happy to share what we know about climate change. So the magnitude is really big. Maybe to share a few facts is Africa is one of the continents that are contributing the least to the changing climate. If you like, we could go to the figures. Only 4% of the global warming emissions are coming from Africa. So that, however, does not mean that we are supposed to be in desperate position, complaining. The magnitude is big. We are contributing less, but we have to actually work towards being more resilient to the changing climate. We are seeing a lot of floods. We are seeing a lot of droughts. We are seeing lives being lost because of due to climate change. So it only shows us that we just have to make sure that that our development plans have a climate change component, making sure that we are not detaching climate change from the economic development that we are struggling to achieve. So if I give a little more facts, for instance, in Rwanda, we are one of the African countries, obviously. We are seeing lots of landslides. We had over 125 landslides in only 2020. We had floods that claim, infrastructure, claim agriculture. We had over 62 floods in only 2020. We had rainstorms, and the list can go on and on. So the magnitude is big, and this is not affecting, it's not supposed to be taken in isolation. This is affecting the biodiversity. This is causing diseases that are such as malaria. We are seeing a huge increase on this. We are seeing communicable diseases due to destruction of infrastructure. And the magnitude is big. It's no longer something that we see, like a distant issue. It is here with us, and all we have to do is to build our resilience, stop claiming to be the vulnerable, continent, but work towards, building the resilience to the changing climate, and also making sure that we are developing in a way that will not require us to, come back and reduce the emissions that we are accumulating in the course of development. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Juliet. I think we'll come back later to what Rwanda has done, because I understand Rwanda is one of the countries that has done a lot of work when it comes to environmental protection. But let me come to you, Christopher. You've done quite some work here in Africa, but also at the global stage. How worrying is the impact of climate change here in Africa?
We can either do two things. We can either worry, or we can be proactive and recognize this as an amazing opportunity. Let me spell it out. Today we have a carbon market globally estimated at over $250 billion a year. We also know scientifically and factually that 70% of the carbon sequestration that is happening on the planet today is happening in the tropical regions of the world, as confirmed by the IPCC report. We also know that the majority of Africa happens to be in the tropical regions. When we look at that, you would expect that 70% of the $250 billion US annual carbon market trade would be going to the tropical regions. Fact is, it's less than 1%. Question mark, why is this happening? If we look at the economic value of carbon sequestration, let us be very clear. A 50% reduction of CO2 carbon emissions worldwide, as is being proposed at COP26, starting all the way back, is not enough. It's not going to bring us to a carbon neutrality. Why? Because if you look at currently what is being absorbed by the anthropogenic emissions, by the terrestrial carbon sinks worldwide on the planet, all the forests, all the terrestrial carbon sinks, wetlands, savanna regions, etc., they are today only able to absorb 30% of human emissions, 30%. About 30-40% goes into the oceans, which is in itself a problem, causing acidification, coral bleaching, etc. And what the planet is unable to absorb remains in the atmosphere. That's another 30-40%. So this is why we're seeing a continuous increase in CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere, which is the root cause of climate change, which we're all suffering about. So if we have 30%, a third, that's being absorbed, and you are reducing from 100 down to 50, you still have a gap of 20. We haven't solved the problem. We've just been talking around like Greta Thunberg said, blah, 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 blah. We're not facing the facts. The fact is that if we are successful in reducing it by 50%, we have to increase the carbon sequestration capacity of terrestrial carbon sinks from 30 to meet the 50%, which is a 20% increase. Translated, that's a 60% increase in the natural terrestrial carbon sinks are required to meet this 50% reduction to achieve planetary balance. Now, if we translate that into numbers, if we look at the carbon emissions of 2018, there are about 48 gigatons, 48.9 to be exact, gigatons of CO2 emissions into the atmosphere, of which a third was absorbed by terrestrial carbon sequestration, about 4.5 gigatons. If we look at 4.5 gigatons and we apply the EU ETS metric of about 51, 52 euros as of a couple of weeks ago per metric ton of carbon, that equates to 214 billion euros for the year 2018 alone. That is missing economic value for a natural carbon sequestration that has occurred. 214, and of that, as we said, 70% occurs in the tropical regions, including Africa. That is an economic value that has been excluded, ignored from a value that has been contributed to the common good. It's missing from the GDP notes. Now, in the same token, what has not been able to be sequestered equates to $690 billion, which is an economic debt still to be paid, effectively by the generations yet to be born, just for the year 2018. And so by the time you look at all that, it equates to an opportunity. In other words, if the African Union, if Africa would prepare itself as an economic bloc, as a region of 54 nations, and come up to COP26 as a combined single voice, and say, as an example, the natural carbon sequestration that is occurring in Africa has an economic value. And that economic value is what we are placing at COP26 on the global stage, not as we are requesting for aid. No, this is a service that has been performed, scientifically verified, that has an economic value, that has to be paid for. If we look at, as an example, the recent
Christophe, that's a very important conversation. But let me first bring in Samuel in this conversation. I think we're going to talk quite a lot, if we have time, about the carbon market and the schemes around that. But let me first bring in Samuel. I'm really interested to what extent does the private sector here in Africa feel like there's a rising climate change risk here?
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me. And I think the points, I want to echo the great points that are being raised by my fellow panelists. You know, for us here in the African continent, it's extremely important to be part of the solution. And as my fellow panelists have kind of pointed out, a significant amount of the problem has been caused, not just the emissions that are happening per year right now, but the cumulative emission has happened by countries that have already developed. And it is that developing process, be it the way energy has been produced, the way industries have produced products that have caused those emissions. But for us, it is very important, one, to understand that our lack of resiliency in our infrastructure and our system makes us the most vulnerable. My home country of Ethiopia, for example, in 2016, when El Nino weather pattern happened, the rain failed us. It failed us for less than a month, but it was enough to cause more than 16 million people to be in need of food aid. That was more than all of Syria at that time that needed food aid. So that type of lack of resiliency forced us to say, how can we be part of that solution? Because it is not an option for us not to have it, but also that solution, the way improving the way we produce food, the way we make homes, the construction process, the energy production process, the food making process, all of those things, all of those innovations are an opportunity for the next generation of economic might and economic development. And we cannot just be part of recipient of technologies, we have to be innovators of the technologies. We have to be part of those solutions. So for us, when we're creating a waste to energy facility, we're learning from the work that has been done in the past, but we're adding innovations on top of that in order to make sure that how can we reduce emission from the way landfills are managed, but also improving on that technology because of the necessity of making sure that our facilities have to be extremely competitive. We started working significantly around how can you create the next generation of animal feed? How can you use greenhouse gases, both methane, carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, in order to use them through a biomanufacturing process in order to generate the next generation of animal feed that is not reliant on soy, that is not reliant on old agricultural methods, but also how do you produce the next generation of materials? Those are all incredible opportunities for us to anchor our economy. One advantage that a lot of African countries do have right now is the fact that we do not have to compete with legacy infrastructures. How can we use that and as an economic engine? So growth, part of what is being discussed in COP26 right now in Glasgow is how can we be in a state of emergency, in a state of crisis for this decade from 2020 to 2030 to lead economic changes and economic development. So Africa has to be part of that solution, both in creating innovations and in being part of that change. And as Chris has said, part of that engine of economic innovation is having access to financing that comes not from aid, not from charities, but also from contribution to the work that conservation has contributed. Africa's existing way of conserving and taking out carbon has contributed to that. So a lot of those combinations have to be part of that solution for the next chapter.
Let me bring in Juliet. Obviously, countries here in Africa have different priorities, but it is important, to have one voice when it comes to addressing all these issues that we're talking about. And my biggest question right now, does Africa really have a clear, harmonized, solution or path towards fighting climate change impact?
Yes, Africa in general understands what needs to be done. A lot of African countries have developed their medium-term and long-term strategic plans on how to, adapt and mitigate the climate change. Lots of countries have already come up with a detailed budget of what this needs to look like in future if we need to, come up with this adaptive mechanism. And I'm continuously coming back to adaptation because this is where our biggest problem is. We need to build our resilience. So Africa generally understands it, but I will not shy away from saying that what my colleague Christophe raised, if we could just come in a very clear voice in these negotiations and know what we are putting on the table and understand what we are demanding for, not in form of, requesting for support or claiming the 100 billion that the Global North claimed, promised or pledged, but has not yet come to materialize. I think we need to understand how to pitch our contribution, but also understand how to pitch what we are coming up with as resilience strategies. So as a continent, there is still some work to be done, but I want to imagine that we are making some good progress. We are seeing some countries really taking this on a very aggressively, working hard to make sure that these ambitious plans are actually implemented. It cannot just be talk, it cannot just be negotiations. It has to come down to what we value, what we treasure, and what we give importance, even on the national planning and budgeting cycles. If we believe this is important for us to work on, then it has better be translated into what the governments are putting aside to work on the climate change aspects, obviously embedded into the rest of the economic development activities. So Africa still has some work to do on this, regarding how we position ourselves as a country and how we negotiate, and knowing that if we are together as a bloc, that is going to give a bigger impact, a bigger voice, and therefore bigger results.
Juliet, I think that's a very important point. Africa needs to know what they really want for them to be able to achieve all these ambitions they have. And I want to bring in Christopher. If you were to highlight top priorities that Africa should have, what would this be in just very few minutes?
We have to recognize the natural capital that we have. If I just give a very highlight example here, let me use the example of Mozambique. Mozambique has about 39 million hectares of forest, and each square kilometer of forest absorbs between 160 to 700 metric tons of carbon in a year. If we equate that just at a third of the current price, that equates to a revenue potential between 1.5 and 6.8 billion euros a year. Let me repeat that. What the contribution of Mozambique to the common good, the common good of humanity, on an annual basis of the forested areas, of 39 million hectares equates to between 1.5 and 6.8 billion euros a year. That is simply ignored. So what this means is that if we take a proactive way, so what we do is we use the advanced satellite technologies to do the actual detailed assessment of the sequestration. So we can do that scientifically. That's what we do. After that, what we do is we tokenize every 1 ton and make that available through a global platform that can be now offered as an alternative to a piece of paper called a certificate or a carbon credit, which is very often based on hyperbole. So we have the scientific facts. With that scientific facts, we can now transform. As a matter of fact, Mozambique could technically go back to the World Bank and all its creditors and say, you know what, you owe us, and you say we owe you. So let's sit down at a table, let's negotiate. And this is all based on fact. So this is the opportunity, this is the power. One last thing as an opportunity. We have the green belt of Africa. We're supposed to be planting trees all the way from Senegal through Ethiopia to Djibouti to stop the progress of the desertification of the Sahara, which is the root cause of insecurity throughout the whole Sahel region, including my own country, Nigeria. So a simple program, which we call OES, a child first week in kindergarten, every child plants, for example, 3 trees. The trees are raised in the name of the child. As the trees grow, they become part of an afforestation program. As the trees grow, they absorb carbon, can be assessed, can be quantified, can be made available on the global market. So in a nutshell, what happens? The first tree finances the primary school education of the child. First and second tree combined finances the secondary school education. The first, second, and third tree combined finances the tertiary stroke vocational training of the child. By so doing, we have caused a revolution in the form of securing the education of the next generation of our brothers and sisters, our children today. At the same time, we've mitigated climate change.
Here, the private sector is very important, and I want to bring up the argument, what is happening at COP. Many politicians are actually arguing that it is the industrialists, the financiers who are supposed to lead the way. And in just 1 minute, Sam, tell me, why does it seem that the private sector in Africa really understand and take the lead when it comes to fighting climate crisis?
Yeah, no, thank you, Julius. The private sector has to look at all of this as an opportunity, because it really is an opportunity for the next 10 years. This decade, where the spotlight is on, there's an opportunity where everybody understands that the traditional way of things just do not work. You just do not get that level of permission to be disruptive. I mean, you've seen it in the car industry. In the last decade, where electric car makers were seen as the fringe in 2010, now they're absolute mainstream. That is a great, great opportunity. There is no way that if we had envisioned it that way, the test would not have come out of Africa. And I want to see that level of opportunity come from the food sector, from the construction sector, from the energy sector, for us to be able to really gravitate towards it. And that can happen, one, again, mainly because we do not have legacy infrastructure. So when we are building new technologies, we have to empower, we have to be in the forefront. It shouldn't be just technologies coming in. Our African companies, this is where governments have to put in funds. And in COPA, I want to commend what Rwanda is doing in announcing a green finance initiative in collaboration with the Development Bank of Rwanda, where they're putting aside about $100 million. And we have to get our money in the front. We have to be able to get the commitment from around the world, because when Africa is growing, when Africa's economic development is coming in, if it is driven by the engine of sustainability and resiliency at its core, it can be the engine for economic development globally. It can allow, because China and the Asian growth has been the engine of global economic growth in the past 3-4 decades. And if Africa is going to be that engine, if that growth happens driven by sustainability and resiliency at its core, then we will have a great opportunity for African businesses, African innovators to be at that forefront. And that has been our focus. So for us, we started out duplicating technologies from around the world, but leading the way now. We're exporting our own technology that we've developed in Ethiopia and working in Rwanda in partnership with Raymond as well and Lake Kivu. We're exporting that in the US, in West Virginia, and abandoned coal mines to be able to capture methane and carbon dioxide and produce high quality animal feed protein, as well as polyhydroxyalkanate or PHAs that are used for biodegradable plastics. So we can lead the way. There are lots of potentials, but at the end of the day, it is very important to know that the next 10 years of aggressive move to make sure that we limit temperature growth to just 1.5% or less than 2%, 2 degrees centigrade is very, very important way of driving our economic growth.
Some that is really, really important. But let me just bring in Juliet, and we're really out of time. You know, in just 1 or 2 lines, what do you want to see from COP as the outcome?
Thank you so much. First of all, I would like to see Africa look more organized at the COP, and after the negotiations, we should be able to build on that momentum that is being built at the COP into real action. And real action means we have to be ready to implement. If I think funds are not the issue, but how ready are we to access those funds? How do we prepare our own population to come up with the right instruments which can be able to allow them access those funds is one, the biggest wish that I want to see come out of the COP. And obviously, to see private sector get more involved into this whole business. It's no longer the business of the government to, advocate, to talk about climate change and look for funds to implement these projects. Samuel eloquently mentioned this. There are opportunities all over the place, but government needs to work with the private sector to really leverage the opportunities that are available.
Gentlemen and ladies, we are out of time, but thank you very much for your insights. And for now, we now understand that Africa really needs to speak as one as we move forward, and quite a lot of expectations from COP26 in Glasgow.